Welcome to Chapter 10, Miss Nikki here. Before we move into identification of muscles, we're going to talk a little bit about muscle organization, some of the functional groups of muscles, fascicle arrangements. We're going to talk about the action of muscles, some of the naming of muscles, a very brief slide on muscle mechanics, and then we'll move into identifying all of the muscles. So we should know that muscle tissue consists of skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. There's about 600 skeletal muscles. We're only going to look at the most superficial 48. The specialized purpose, we should all know this by now. Glucose, which is chemical energy, is broken down and we form ATP, and we use that ATP to move. That ATP is now mechanical energy. This last bullet, muscles pull, they cannot push. So the muscle is going to contract. The muscle is attached to the bone if we're talking about skeletal muscle, and when the muscle contracts, it pulls the bone and therefore produces movement. Next, we move to functional groups of muscles. What one group does, another undoes. Probably the best way to think of this is if one muscle is contracting, then another muscle on the opposite side of wherever the action is occurring has to relax or is relaxing. So I will show you an example and it'll probably make a little bit more sense. So let's move through the 4 functional groups and then I'll show you an example. So the prime mover, this is the one that's doing the majority of the movement. The antagonist is opposing the movement. It's doing the opposite of what the prime mover is doing. That's the do and undo, right? This figure from the book is trying to show you an example. They're showing you the pectoralis major, that's this muscle right here, and this is the prime mover. This muscle is trying to flex the arm. But because this muscle on the posterior side, which is the latissimus dorsi, attaches to the vertebrae and it also attaches to the humerus, if this muscle is going to contract in order to bring the arm in front, this muscle has to relax. So as this is contracting, this muscle is relaxing in order for you to move your arm. And we would call that the antagonist. It's doing the opposite action of the prime mover. Remember, there were 4 functional groups, so this is the 3rd and the 4th. You're going to have a synergist. It's going to help the prime mover. It's going to aid in the movement or the force. And we have the fixator, which is going to provide stability. It's going to immobilize the bone or the muscle at its origin. We don't know what the origin is yet, but I'll show you in just a second. It basically stops any unwanted movement. So no unwanted movement. This is a good note that the same muscle, depending on the action, the muscle isn't always just the prime mover. It could be the prime mover with one type of movement, but it could be the antagonist for a different movement. So I'm going to show you the next example and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. Let's look at the example across the elbow. So we're looking right here at the elbow and we're going to look at the prime mover. So this is the first mover, if you will. What is the antagonist? It does the opposite movement, opposite of the prime, opposite of prime mover. The synergist, that's the helper. And the fixator holds in place, so it stops unwanted movement at another joint. Okay, so first let's look at the prime mover, which is the brachialis. The brachialis is this muscle here. The synergist, the helper, is the biceps brachii, which is here. So the prime mover initiates the action. If these 2 muscles here contract, that's going to pull or flex, decrease the angle. The antagonist does the opposite. The antagonist is the triceps brachii. So the triceps brachii, it has to relax. If you're going to flex the arm, the muscle in the back has to do the opposite of the prime mover. It has to relax. So while these are contracting, becoming smaller, these are going to relax or become longer, if you want to think of it that way. The fixator can't be viewed in this figure, but I'll tell you it's right here, your rhomboid muscle, and it stops unwanted movement at the shoulder. So you're not trying to have the entire arm move, you just want movement at the elbow. So every muscle works in one of these functional groups to produce movement, and the muscle can change from one functional group to another depending on the action. So we could switch these. If the triceps brachii are contracting, they could now be the prime mover. If this muscle is contracting, these two have to relax in order for the movement to occur. So this is why physical therapists have to understand not only where every muscle is attached, but they also have to be able to understand how muscles work in functional groups to produce movement. Before we move on, let's just get the basic definitions for origin, insertion, and belly. So the origin is the bony attachment at the stationary end. So that's important. So this is the end that does not move. So no movement. The insertion is the bony attachment to the mobile end or the movement. So this is where we allow movement. And then the belly is the thick middle region. We're going to name all of the bellies. So we're not going to worry about origin and insertion unless it's in the name of the muscle, then you might want to know those. But if you do physical therapy, you will have to know all of the origin, insertion points of all of the muscles. For me, if you just understand the definition and you can name all the muscles, that's fine. So you can see here origin. So origin are the sites that are not going to move. So the origins are no movement, and the insertions for each muscle are where movement is going to occur. And that makes sense because if we were flexing our arm, this site is also going to move, right, as the muscle contracts. And then this is the belly of the muscle. Let's move on to naming skeletal muscles. There are several categories that we use to name skeletal muscles. One is location. So temporalis is a muscle. All we did was add an IS to the end. This is the muscle that sits on top of the temporal bone. We have a frontalis, an occipitalis. Second, we can look at shape. So deltoid means triangle. So the deltoid muscle is a triangular shaped muscle. 3, we can look at muscle size. So maximus, largest, minimus, smallest, longest is long. We'll look at brevis, which means short. Next, we have the direction of muscle fibers or fascicles. We'll talk more about fascicles or bundles of muscle fibers. But rectus means straight. You might also have transversus or oblique. Remember, it depends if they run at an angle. Transverse would be east to west, right? Oblique would be northeast to southwest. Number origins. Biceps means 2, triceps means 3. This is why we have to add the word brachii. I have to say biceps brachii, because if you say biceps, that really just means 2. 2 what? Lastly, we can look at the location of attachments. So we can look at where the origin or insertion point was for the naming of the muscle. So this is a muscle, sterno, cleido or cleido, mastoid, sometimes mastoideus, but it tells you in the name that it attaches to the sternum, to the clavicle, and to the mastoid process of the temporal bone. I lied, we had one more, muscle action. I forgot that sometimes we name them after the action produced by the muscle, either flexor or extensor. And then sometimes you can combine all of these. So extensor is telling you the action. Carpi is telling you wrist. So this is the action. Radialis is telling you also the location, right? It is telling you radius. And longus is telling you that it's a long muscle. So sometimes muscle names are really nice. It'll tell you this is extensor is a muscle that works on the posterior side of the arm. So this is telling you it's on the posterior side. It runs from the radius to the carpals and that it's long. We don't know really about fascicles yet because we haven't looked in chapter 9 at bundles of muscle fiber cells. So you can go ahead and take a peek in chapter 9 if you would like and look at fascicles, but basically it's individual muscle fiber cells all bundled together. Fascicles determine the muscle's range of motion. We talked about range of motion already, and it determines the muscle's power. So how many muscle fibers are there? All this means is the larger your muscle is, the more powerful the muscle is, right? Here are some of the fascicle arrangements and some examples. So circular muscles, they're going to be round. The muscle fiber cells are going to come together in a round pattern. Example, orbicularis oculi, urethral and anal sphincters. So anything that's circular that's going to open and close, you're going to have a circular fascicle arrangement of muscle fiber cells. Convergent is fan-shaped. Examples, the pectoralis major, the temporalis. You're going to have parallel muscles. They can span long distances. You're going to see the rectus abdominis, the zygomaticus major. We also have fusiform cells. They're thick in the middle and tapered at the ends. So basically tapered at the ends and thicker in the middle, and then they go back to tapered. So that would be biceps brachii, gastrocnemius. We have pennate muscles. And there's several different types here. There's uni, meaning one, bi, meaning two, and multi, two or more. And we'll look at some of those examples on the next page. So we can see examples on this figure for all of the different fascicle arrangements. I would be able to name all of the fascicle arrangements and give one example of a muscle that we've studied. So the ones that kind of throw people are the bipennate, the multi, and the uni. So uni means one, and basically all the muscles are coming off of this one side, all the muscle fiber cells. And then here it almost looks like it's running down the middle and that you have fascicles running from two sides. And then this one, it's bundles of uni or bipennate. I really want to look at just the very basics of muscle mechanics. So we're going to look at lever, effort, and load, and there's a figure on the next slide. I really just want us to understand the basics, that this is a partnership between the muscles and the skeletal system, basically the bones, right? So your bone is acting as a lever that moves on a fixed point called a fulcrum. The fulcrum is your joint. The effort is the force supplied by the muscle contraction, and you use that force to lift the load. So obviously this is the load to be lifted. This is whatever weight you're trying to lift. The fulcrum is your joint, and your bones act as levers. The effort is happening here in the muscle contraction. So if this muscle can produce enough effort or force, then you'll be able to lift this load. So the best learning strategies, I would examine the models. I would look at the photographic atlas or go to Blackboard and look at my model pictures. When you're studying a muscle, sometimes it's good to palpate or feel it on yourself or on others. Locate the origin and insertions of the muscles on the skeleton if that helps you. You might also look at the derivation of the name. Where did we name the muscle? Why did we name it? Because of its location, appearance, origin, insertion. Say the names aloud to yourself or to a study partner. Spell them correctly. You will be taken off for spelling. So if it's spelled incorrectly, you'll only receive half the points even if you identify the muscle correctly. The other thing that I would do is, if you're worried about pronunciation, go to howwouldyousay.com. Great website. You can type in the muscle name and it'll tell you how to say it. Here's a figure showing you the major skeletal muscles of the body. This view is anterior. They give you nice headings, so they tell you what area you're looking at, and then they list the muscles that you would find in that area. I want you to pay attention to the torso section. You can see that this side is superficial and this side is deep. So they had to remove these superficial muscles in order for you to see these deeper muscles. Here we have the posterior view, and again we have the headings and the muscles that correspond to those regions. But what I wanted to point out was in this example you can see that some of the superficial muscles lie on top of the deep muscles so that only a small section of the deep muscle is visible. So all of this is the gluteus maximus belly, and the gluteus medius, you can only see this section right here. So again, this is the medius, this is the maximus. But the medius actually comes all the way down. It's just that part of the gluteus maximus is covering it from the view. Now we're going to move on to facial muscles. So there's several muscles to identify on this slide. You can see we'll start with frontalis and occipitalis. So frontalis is here, it sits on top of the frontal bone. This is going to help you like raise your eyebrows. Occipitalis is going to pull your scalp down. You can see that frontalis and occipitalis together are sometimes called epicranius because they're connected by this sheet of connective tissue. Next we have orbicularis oculi. This is a circular muscle, allows you to open and close your eye. You have orbicularis oris. This allows you to open and close your mouth. You have nasalis, which sits here over your nasal bone. This allows you to flare your nostrils or twitch your nose. And then we have zygomaticus here and here, and these are attached to the zygomatic bone. And when these muscles contract, you lift the corners of your mouth in order to smile. Here we have the muscles necessary for mastication, which is chewing. So we have the buccinator here. Buccinator allows you to purse your lips or blow. We have the masseter here. The masseter is responsible for elevating the mandible. It's also the muscle that's used if you're clenching your teeth, if you're holding your jaw. And then your temporalis is also going to elevate the mandible here, and it can also elevate the ear. Here we have the throat muscles or anterior neck. The only one that we're going to worry about is the sternocleidomastoideus. So you can see it attaches here at the mastoid of the temporal bone. It attaches here at the clavicle and here at the manubrium of the sternum. So if you, as you can see in this picture, they're elevating their head. If you touch your chin to your sternum, you're using your sternocleidomastoid. Also, if you nod your head up and down. Here's another view of the sternocleidomastoideus. You can see now the mastoid process of the temporal bone. You can see that it's attached to the clavicle and the sternum. This muscle also allows the sternum to expand when you're taking in a really deep breath. So let's make sure that we can identify the muscles if we have a model. It doesn't look anything like the picture that we first learned the muscles. So frontalis is this muscle. Occipitalis we can't see, right? We'd have to go back here to the back. Where's zygomaticus? These are zygomaticus right here, and they come together and attach to the zygomatic bone. Where's temporalis? Temporalis is here. Where is masseter? Masseter is here. Where's the buccinator? Buccinator is right here. Nasalis, here. Orbicularis oculi, orbicularis oris. And then this muscle right here, this is the sternocleidomastoideus. Next we have to look at platysma. So here's platysma. There are very few models that actually show this muscle, so I might have to use a figure. You can see it here. It's this sheet of muscle that it comes up to the lower jaw and all the way down. It's going to aid in depressing the mandible. It also pulls the corners of your mouth down, so if you're going to frown. And so it's this sheet of muscle. And you can see here, this is part of the sternocleidomastoideus. Let's look at the superficial muscles of the posterior thorax. So we have the trapezius first. This is the trapezius muscle, and they've removed the other side so that you could see the deep muscles. The trapezius is used if you're shrugging your shoulders or if you're adducting the scapula, bringing the scapula together. The next muscle is the latissimus dorsi. You can see it attaches here at the vertebrae. It comes up and attaches to the humerus. Some people refer to this as the backside or posterior side of the armpit. The latissimus dorsi is used if you're hyperextending at the shoulder joint, bringing your arms backwards. Probably the best example is if you're a swimmer and you're doing the butterfly stroke. You would be using your latissimus dorsi. Again, can we name these on a model? So I didn't write the names off to the side. We only have a few to look at. But this would be occipitalis. Right now we can see the occipitalis. This would actually be our sternocleidomastoideus. I'm just going to abbreviate. We can see the nice diamond shape of our trapezius, and then we can see the latissimus dorsi. These are other muscles. We do not have to know them. We could, if you wanted to know them, you could look them up. This is the infraspinatus. It's attached to the scapula. This is the teres minor, and this is the teres major. We do not have to identify any of these, so this is FYI for your information. I just wanted you to notice that there are lots of back muscles. Remember that you're constantly standing erect and that you need a lot of muscles in this area that are fatigue resistant. So muscles that will work really hard for a really long period of time. And I just wanted you to see some of these names and see that there are various muscles that are helping us stay erect. Now we move on to the superficial muscles of the anterior thorax. Here we have the pectoralis major. The pectoralis major is going to pull the shoulders down, so roll your shoulders forward down to your sternum. It's going to help with flexing, so bending your arm, rotating out at the shoulder, or adducting the humerus, bringing the arm back in. Then we have the pectoralis minor, and you can see the pectoralis minor here comes down and attaches to the ribs. The pectoralis minor, it's also going to help with rolling the shoulders, and then it's also going to pull on the ribs when we're inhaling, so to allow for the expansion of the rib cage as your lungs fill up. Last, we have the serratus anterior. They say it kind of looks like a serrated edge. You can see here the serratus anterior attaching to these ribs. The serratus anterior is going to abduct or abduct the scapula, move them out. So when the serratus anterior contracts, you're able to lift at the shoulders and move your scapula away from the body. Now to a model that we would have in lab. Can you identify these structures? This is the pectoralis major. These are the pectoralis minor. It's kind of hard to see the serratus anterior here, but this is the location. We'll see those in just a moment. And you can see that they had to cut away the pectoralis major in order for you to see the pectoralis minor. Let's also go back and see if we can remember that this is the sternocleidomastoideus. Here's another great view to see the pectoralis major. And you can see here these little serrated edges. This is the serratus anterior. Next we move on to the intercostals. So in your lab book it just refers to intercostals, but we do have an inner layer and an outer layer. So there's external and internal intercostals. And these muscles are also going to be used in inhaling and elevating the sternum and the thoracic cage, and then when you exhale, contracting to help bring the sternum and the rib cage back down. So you can see that the internal go all the way to the sternum. So the sternum would be here. And that the external all go towards the back and bind where we have our vertebrae. Again, to locate these on a model, I'm not sure if you can see the little hash marks here, but the external intercostals are coming from the back to the front, and then these are the internal, and they originate at the sternum. The internals are going to go underneath, and the externals are going to sit on top of. So this is two layers at one point where you have the internal intercostals underneath and the external on top. Now we have to talk about the abdominal wall muscles, and there are 4. The best way to look at these are to think kind of in layers. So here are the external obliques. They're on the outside, and you're going to have this sheet of connective tissue. They cut away the sheet so that you could see the rectus abdominis. So again, the rectus abdominis, this is your 8-pack or 6-pack abs. Your rectus abdominis is going to allow you to flex at the waist, so to bend over, do crunches. You're going to have your external obliques. Then the next layer, you're going to have your rectus abdominis, and you're going to have your internal obliques. And then on the third layer, the most internal, you're going to have your transverse abdominis, and these run east to west. Again, we have to look at the models. So these are the external obliques. Notice how they go all the way up and they meet the serratus anterior. We have this thin layer of connective tissue. Underneath, we have the rectus abdominis. On the inside, we have the internal obliques. Notice that the internal obliques stop at the bottom of the rib cage. We have to go to the inside of the model in order to see the transverse abdominis, right? All of these, the rectus abdominis is going to be used for flexing at the trunk. All of the rest of these you're going to use to do twisting motion at the trunk. We should be familiar with this muscle now, the diaphragm. It aids in breathing, right? The diaphragm pulls down when you inhale and it snaps back up into place when you exhale. You can see this is an inferior view. So you're looking from the inside underneath. This is the bottom of the sternum, or the xiphoid process of the sternum. And you can see the nice umbrella shape that the diaphragm creates when you look at this inferior view. Just for reference, let's make sure that we remember where the diaphragm is located, and that it is the muscle that separates the thoracic and the abdominopelvic cavities. Here we have the levator ani. This is the last muscle until we move on to the arms and legs. So we can see levator ani here and here in the male and female, and it does exactly what the name says it does. It lifts the anus. This muscle is part of a group of muscles that are going to help support the pelvic cavity organs, and this one in particular is going to help lift the anus during defecation. Let's look at the muscles that cross the shoulder joint. The first one is the deltoid. So the deltoid is this triangular shaped muscle. The deltoid is going to allow you to elevate and abduct the arm. Next we have the biceps brachii. This muscle here is the biceps brachii. Not sure if you can see the indentation, but biceps means two heads. So the attachment point, the two heads, are deep to the deltoid. You'd have to remove the deltoid to see it. Next we have brachialis. Biceps brachii is going to be to flex the arm. Brachialis is going to be deep to the biceps brachii. Brachialis is going to be if you're doing pull-ups. So your palm isn't facing you, but the back of your hand is facing you. And then brachioradialis tells you where it is. Brachial is upper arm, right? And radialis is lower arm. So this muscle here is your brachioradialis. It spans from your brachial arm humerus region to your radius. Your brachioradialis is also going to allow for flex at the elbow. So once again, let's look at the models. This is my biceps brachii. This muscle here, this is the brachioradialis. Here is my deltoid. And it's hard to see the brachialis on this side, but you can see this muscle here. This is the brachialis. This is another nice side view. So this is the biceps brachii. The other head is over here, but you can't see it with this view. This is the brachialis. And then this, we're going to learn, is the triceps brachii. So it's biceps brachii, brachialis, part of the triceps brachii. And then this, of course, is our deltoid. Here is the triceps brachii figure from the book. You can really only see two of the heads. It's a little bit hard to see, but here's one head, here's two, and the third goes under, crosses under. So there are three heads, and it's attached to the brachial region. This is on the posterior side. Back to the model view, I want to make sure that we can see these. So this and this, these two heads are all that you can see of the triceps brachii. So the third is not visible. But remember, how do you find the triceps brachii? It's always on the back part of the arm, the posterior section of the upper arm. So recap one more time. This is the biceps brachii. This is part of the triceps brachii, and this is the brachialis. Now we're looking at the palm side. So palm side up of the antebrachial. I wanted you to see the brachioradialis in full view. So this is the brachioradialis. It attaches to the radius. It comes up and underneath the biceps brachii and brachialis to attach to the humerus. But we also have the pronator teres. And remember pronator, pronate, supinate. So supinate is your palm up. Pronate is when you rotate the radius over the ulna and your palm is now facing down. That's the muscle that we're going to use, the pronator teres. So here's another arm model. This is not on a torso. This is just the arm by itself. So this muscle here, this is the brachioradialis. This tiny muscle here, this is the pronator teres. This, just to recap, would be biceps brachii. And then the back section here would be triceps brachii. For this slide, I want you to notice which side flexors would be found. So I'm looking at the forearm, antebrachial area, and I'm looking at the anterior side. So when I say anterior, that's in anatomical position. So this is the palm side, right? I'm looking at the palm side of my forearm. You notice how there are flexors. So think of the flexing position. If you're doing a bicep curl, the muscles of your forearm are actually helping with that action. So to flex at the elbow, you're also using flexors. They're on the palm side or anterior side of your forearm. Now we move on to extensors on the posterior side of the forearm. So this is your palm down. You can see extensors listed throughout. So the extensors, you can break the word down if you understand extensor carpi ulnaris. Extensor is going to say we're on the posterior side of the forearm. Carpi means wrist. and ulnaris means ulna. So if you wanted to locate the extensor carpi ulnaris, you have a general location in which to look for that muscle. Here is the model again, just so that we can be clear. If I say palm up or anterior, I'm talking about these muscles. These would be called flexors. The muscles on the posterior side of the forearm, these would be called extensors. Here we have the three gluteal muscles. You can see that there's a medius, a minimus, and a maximus. So this is the maximus, and it would have spanned this area. The maximus, gluteus maximus, is used for hyperextension at the hip, and it will also rotate the leg. Next we have the medius, and the medius would have spanned this area, but they had to cut it. The gluteus medius and the minimus both have the same action. They're both going to abduct or adduct, move the leg away from the body, elevate it laterally, move it to the outside. And you can see underneath that this is the gluteus minimus. So this is superficial, this one is intermediate or middle, and the minimus is the deepest. So again, a model figure for you to look at. This muscle here was cut. That was the gluteus maximus. This muscle here was cut. This is the gluteus medius. And they did this so that you could see this muscle, which is the gluteus minimus. Now we move on to the quadriceps. So these are the four muscles that are attached to the femur. There are only three here. One is missing. It's the vastus intermedius. And that is going to be directly underneath the rectus femoris here. Rectus femoris. Rectus means straight on the femur femoris. The vastus intermedius is deep to the rectus femoris. All of these muscles are going to aid in the extension of the leg. So bending at the knee, doing a squat, going from squatting position to standing. All of these four muscles are going to be used. In addition, the rectus femoris is going to help rotate your hip. So this muscle here helps rotate the hip. We then have the vastus lateralis, which is outside, and we have the medialis, which is inside. So this muscle is the lateralis, and this muscle is the medialis. And both of these, including the rectus femoris, extend the length of the femur. On to the models. Make sure we can identify these. So this muscle here is the rectus femoris. Directly underneath the rectus femoris deep would be the vastus intermedius. These are medial, so these have to be the vastus medialis. This one here and here are lateral, so this would have to be lateralis. I took the left leg and I enlarged it so that you could see the muscles a little bit more clearly. When you're looking at the model, look for the big toe. If it's big toe, then it has to be the medial side. If it's the pinky toe, it has to be the lateral side. So this again would be the rectus femoris. This would be lateralis, and this would be medialis. Now we move to the posterior side. I know this is posterior because I can see gluteal muscles. We're going to look at the hamstrings. There are three muscles that make up this group of muscles called hamstrings. The first is biceps femoris. So I'm going to outline the biceps femoris. There are two heads, you just can't see them. What I would say is the biceps femoris is on the posterior side and it's lateral. This would be medial, and this would be lateral, right? So if you look at the posterior side of the thigh, the lateral muscle, even though it looks like one muscle, is actually the biceps femoris. The semitendinosus and semimembranosus are sitting together. So the T is for top. The membranosus with the B is on the bottom. So let me show you tendinosus first. It is this small muscle, and then underneath is the membranosus. It's more of a flat, broad muscle. So the tendinosus, semitendinosus, sits directly on top of the semimembranosus. All three of these are going to aid with flexion at the knee and extension of the hip. The lateral, the biceps femoris that's on the lateral side, is going to help you rotate the leg laterally. And then these two muscles, the semitendinosus and membranosus, since they're medial, they're going to help you rotate the leg back to the medial side. Once again, with models to look at, so I'm on the posterior side. The muscle that's lateral is always the biceps femoris. So this muscle on this side and this muscle on this side. There are two muscles here. One's the semitendinosus, one's the semimembranosus. It's better if we look at an enlarged view, or this is just a plain leg model rather than a whole torso model. So this is the biceps femoris. And I'm not sure if you can see the division line here, so I'm going to draw it. This is the tendinosus on top, and this is the membranosus on bottom. These are both medial. Now we move on to the four other thigh muscles. These two are going to do adduction, and these two are going to do flexion at the hip. So we have the tensor fasciae latae, and that is this muscle here. Then we have the sartorius, which spans the length of the femur. Sartorius is what you use to sit cross-legged. Adductor muscles, we're going to come back and talk about in another slide, but there are several. And then the gracilis, which it runs along the inner thigh. Back to the model figures. So this is the inner portion of the leg, or the medial. You can see this strip here. This is the gracilis. Directly behind the gracilis are abductors. You can see part of the sartorius crossing over. You can see the sartorius here and here. You can also see a tiny section of the tensor. Here's another figure from your book showing you all of the different adductor muscles. So this is the adductor brevis, the adductor longus, the adductor magnus. So all of these inner thigh muscles, we're just going to group them together and call them adductors. Just to be clear on the model, this would be an adductor and this would be an adductor. Now we move to the lower leg. So we can see here the tibialis anterior. It's facing forward and it's attached to the tibia. So this muscle here, it is lateral to the tibia, is the tibialis anterior. It does cover part of the tibia, which is why they use the word anterior as well. So tibialis anterior is going to be used to flex at the ankle, and also, if you remember, dorsiflexion. So that heel strike motion, lift your toes up. The location on the model, it would be this muscle here and here. This would be the tibialis anterior. The next muscle we'll look at is the fibularis longus. So it's attached to the fibula, and it is a long muscle. Comes all the way down to that lateral malleolus. The fibularis longus, again, is going to aid in dorsiflexion or that heel strike or lifting your toes off the floor. Here's our model again. This would be the tibialis anterior. I know you can't see the tibia, but I'm telling you that's the tibialis anterior. This muscle we'll come back and talk about. Skip over to this muscle. This goes all the way down to the lateral malleolus right here. So this is your fibularis longus. Now we're moving to the posterior side of the lower leg. And we have the gastrocnemius and the soleus. Both of these muscles are going to help flex the leg at the knee. They're going to raise the heel doing plantar flexion, so on your tippy toes. The gastrocnemius is here. These two muscles, we might think of this as our calf muscle. But the soleus sits underneath the gastrocnemius, so you can only see this tiny little section, but it would, if we remove the gastrocnemius, it would be a flat sheet of muscle. We also need to discuss where you would find the flexors on the lower leg. So this is the opposite of the arm. So the flexors are on the posterior side. So you can see back here on the back posterior side is where you would find flexors. So you would find extensors on the anterior side. So here's the patella. Make sure we know where we are with the figure. So on the front side or anterior side of the lower leg, we're going to find extensors. So this one, extensor digitorum longus, it's telling us it's on the anterior side. It goes into your digits or your toes, and that's a long muscle. Back to the model again. So remember, this was our tibialis anterior. This one was our fibularis longus. This muscle right here, this is that extensor digitorum longus. So it's on the anterior side, so it's an extensor. And then on the posterior side, we would have flexors. This division line here, this would be my gastrocnemius, and this right here would be my soleus. This last slide really just is showing you the complexities of the foot, just like the previous slide where I showed you the complexities of the hand. You can see all of these muscles that are attached to the metatarsals, and you can see the tendons as they run into the phalanges. So you can see that all of the phalanges do not have muscles. The toes are controlled by the muscles that are actually in the foot or in the hand. So with chapter 10, I highly suggest that you review this video several times, that you go to Blackboard and you look at some of the interactive lab quizzes that we have, and just study as much as you possibly can. You will be counted off for spelling as well, so make sure you get all of these endings correctly. So you don't write down temporal, you write down temporalis for your muscle lab practical. Good luck. If you need anything, let me know.